So, welcome to another episode. The whole idea behind this series, is first of all to go on bike rides because I love going on bike rides, and it helps me to think more clearly when I'm riding my bike, but also to answer some of our deep questions. Because I found a quick reading of God or a quick gulp of God, we might be left with a really negative thought. But if we dig a little bit deeper, I found that every single time God comes through and there really is a good answer. So, that's kind of the idea of what I do here. Now, I have a fan going, so hopefully we can't hear the fan. But if we can, it's so hot today. So either the aircon or the fan makes a lot less noise. So this episode is all about diseases, you know? So this idea that why are there so many diseases? You pick up a medical journal or a medical dictionary, and it's just hundreds of pages of things that can go wrong. Like, why would God create it this way? It's like, how are people supposed to live when anything could go wrong at any moment? And it does. So it's quite frustrating. And also, I wanted to answer the question, did all these things just arrive? Like when Adam and Eve sinned? Like God just invented all these horrible things? He invented the bubonic plague as soon as Adam sinned. Okay, he made a mistake. It was a terrible mistake, but to mess up everyone else for all time, forever, seems to be too much to me. It just doesn't seem to fit at all. So I'm trying to understand. Especially because personally, I've had some teeth problems. And I think I might have mentioned this before somewhere that why do we have nerve endings in our teeth? It's, this piece of porcelain stuff connected to a bone. Why do I need it to feel anything? And why such intense pain? It doesn't make sense to me. This whole design makes no sense. So maybe I'll try to figure some of those things out too. So why are there so many diseases? Did they all come about because of Adam and Eve's sin? What are we supposed to do with a good God, but then all these horrible diseases? I was reading the story of Johnny Erickson, who was, a young girl of like 16 years old. And she prayed for God to get her attention. I'm not doing too good in my spiritual walk. I know I should be doing better. Do something to get my attention. So she went swimming and she dove in shallow water and she broke her neck, or her back. And so now she's a paraplegic for the rest of her life. How do you square this with a good God? How is this supposed to fit? So, I appreciate her faith. I'm in awe of her faith. I think it's awesome. But at the same time, it's like, how could God have done this to her? But did he? So let's look into this. Let's see what we can figure out. Let's learn together. All right, let's look at some verses on why we get sick or injured. 1 Corinthians 11:27. Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks the Lord's cup in a way unworthy of the Lord will be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. 11:28. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy way eats and drinks judgment to himself if he doesn't discern the Lord's body. For this cause, many among you are weak and sickly, and not a few asleep. 2 Chronicles 21:14 through 19. Behold, Yahweh will strike your people with a great plague, including your children, your wives, and all your possessions. And you will have a great sickness with the disease of your bowels, until your bowels fall out by reason of the sickness, day by day. Yahweh stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and of the Arabians, who are beside the Ethiopians. And they came up against Judah, broke into it, and carried away all the possessions that were found in the king's house, including his sons and his wives, so that there was no son left to him except Jehoahaz, the youngest of his sons. After all this, Yahweh struck him in his bowels with an incurable disease. In process of time, at the end of 2 years, his bowels fell out by reason of his sickness, and he died of severe diseases. His people made no burning for him, like the burning of his fathers. 2 Corinthians 12:7 through 8. By reason of the exceeding greatness of the revelations, that I should not be exalted excessively, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to torment me, that I should not be exalted excessively. Concerning this thing, I begged the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. 2 Corinthians 12:9. He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather glory in my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may rest on me. 3 John 2. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be healthy, even as your soul prospers. Acts 10:38. How God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. Acts 12:20 through 23. Now Herod was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon. They came with one accord to him, and having made Blastus the king's personal aide, their friend, they asked for peace, because their country depended on the king's country for food. On an appointed day, Herod dressed himself in royal clothing, sat on the throne, and gave a speech to them. The people shouted, "The voice of a god, and not of a man." Immediately, an angel of the Lord struck him, because he didn't give God the glory. Then he was eaten by worms and died. Acts 28:8 through 9. The father of Publius lay sick of fever and dysentery. Paul entered into him, prayed, and laying his hands on him, healed him. Then, when this was done, the rest also who had diseases in the island came and were cured. Deuteronomy 28:58. If you will not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that you may fear this glorious and fearful name, Yahweh, your God. 28:59. Then Yahweh will make your plagues and the plagues of your offspring fearful, even great plagues, and of long duration, and severe sicknesses, and of long duration. He will bring on you again all the diseases of Egypt, which you were afraid of, and they will cling to you. Also, every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of this law, Yahweh will bring them on you until you are destroyed. you will be left few in number, even though you are as the stars of the sky for multitude, because you didn't listen to Yahweh, your God's voice. 28:63. It will happen that as Yahweh rejoiced over you to do good and to multiply you, so Yahweh will rejoice over you to cause you to perish and to destroy you. You will be plucked from the land that you're going in to possess. Exodus 9:8-9. Yahweh said to Moses and to Aaron, "Take handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it towards the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become small dust all over all the land of Egypt, and shall be boils and blisters breaking out on man and on animal throughout all the land of Egypt." Exodus 9:15-16. For now I would have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this cause I have made you stand, to show you my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. Exodus 15:26. He said, if you will diligently listen to Yahweh, your God's voice, and will do that which is right in his eyes, and will pay attention to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, and will put none of the diseases, or I will put none of the diseases on you, which I have put on the Egyptians, for I am Yahweh who heals you. Exodus 23:25. You shall serve Yahweh your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from among you. Galatians 6:7. Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. Genesis 3:17. To Adam he said, because you have listened to your wife's voice and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. The ground is cursed for your sake. You will eat from it with much labor all the days of your life. May God add blessing to the reading of his word. All right, so what did we learn about, diseases and accidents and all these kind of questions that we have? Well, I found a number of different reasons these might happen. One being just the state of creation. In Genesis 3:17, it says this, to Adam he said, because you have listened to your wife's voice and have eaten from the tree, about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. The ground is cursed for your sake. You will eat from it with much labor all the days of your life. And then it's also mirrored in Romans 8:20-21. For the creation was subjected to vanity, not of its own will, but because of him who subjected it in hope, that the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of decay into the liberty of the glory of the children of God. Well, people get sick and hurt, because the world is corrupted, So the writer or the person who made this video, he had this idea that you can drive your car and you could not break any laws. You have a nice, beautiful car, but your car's still going to get dirty. It might get scratched. Birds may go on it. You know, things are just going to happen because the world we live in isn't perfect. You know, the creation is broken. It's dirty. It's running down. You know, it's decaying. And so that's the first idea, that some things just happen because we don't live in a perfect world anymore. You know, things are just naturally breaking down. You know, the DNA code seems to be breaking down. And yeah, so that's one of the reasons that things happen. And is it God's fault? Well, all he did was pull out the perfection from it, you know? I mean, man wanted to do his own thing, so God pulled out the protection. So does God directly give little kids cancer? Sometimes, and we'll learn that later, but a lot of this is just because we live in a broken world and we're all subjected to it, you know? What's another reason? One of the other reasons I found is just, natural consequences, you know? Proverbs 6:27 through 28. Can a man scoop fire into his lap and his clothes not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? Well, what about this famous passage from Galatians 6:7 through 8? Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. You know, so there's just natural consequences. You know, I can't put fire into my lap. I can't walk on coals. And say, God will protect me. A lot of these things are our fault. So we have to stop and ask, is this my fault? Like if you smoke cigarettes, there's a chance you could get lung cancer. Now, I'm not putting anybody down who smokes cigarettes, but you know, there seems to be a direct causal link, smoking cigarettes and lung cancer. So if you smoke for 40 years and then you get lung cancer, can we really directly blame God? Or what about if you eat too much sugar? I'm very careful of that. You know, some sugar is great, but don't have sugar in everything. Well, you might get diabetes then. You know, there seems to be a link between too much sugar and diabetes. If you drink too much alcohol, you might get cirrhosis of the liver. Now, I'm not saying you will get it, you know, but you're taking that chance. If you eat junk food, do you expect your body to be healthy? If you sit on the couch and never exercise, you know, are you going to be, you know, healthy and you know, and some people are. Some people can sit on the couch and still be okay. It does work for some people. So that's another one. It's just, you know, what's our role in things? I always thought of things that, you know, aren't our fault, but are somebody's fault. Like someone puts too much lead in our drinking water. We know lead's deadly, you know, or they used to put asbestos, you know, in the ceiling and sometimes in the walls. And now we know that asbestos is deadly. So can we blame God? Well, you know, we can't even really blame people. We didn't know this. So we have to stop and ask, what is our fault? Sometimes it comes through poverty. They have bad drinking water or bad food, you know. So is that our fault? Absolutely. We need to work on feeding the homeless, making sure that, you know, all the wealth isn't on one side. So how much of it is our fault? Good question. Well, the Bible teaches that there's this creature called Satan. I know the world thinks that that's just ridiculous, and I'm sure Satan loves that. You know, I heard the quote somewhere that one of the greatest tricks of Satan is to get people to believe he doesn't exist. Then he can freely do his work. But the Bible says there clearly is this creature called Satan. Not believing that he exists doesn't make him not exist. Job chapter 1, verse 9 through 12. The setup is, God said Job's a righteous man, right? He will not deny me. And Satan's kind of saying, yeah, he'll not deny you as long as you keep him rich and healthy and okay. But touch his body, that'll be the end. This is how it went. Job 1, 9 through 12. Then Satan answered Yahweh and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you made a hedge around him and around his house and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will renounce you to your face. Yahweh said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only on himself don't stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh. And this is said again in Job chapter 2, 6 through 7. And this says, Yahweh said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand. Only spare his life. So Yahweh went out from the presence of Yahweh and struck Job with painful sores from the sole of his foot to his head. And so here we have a clear example that sometimes diseases can come from Satan, directly from Satan, And we see this in the New Testament too, like in Luke 13, 15 through 16. Therefore the Lord answered him, you hypocrites! Doesn't each one of you free his ox or his donkey from the stall on the Sabbath and lead him away to water? Ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan had bound 18 long years, be freed from this bondage on the Sabbath day? So Satan had bound her for 18 long years. Interesting. Acts 10:38. How God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. So here we learn we can be oppressed by the devil. And so this is one we don't even want to deal with. Some of us don't even believe in Satan. Never mind that he could bring on sickness. And so again, these people were innocent. He said that this woman was a daughter of Abraham. So she was completely innocent of this. She didn't do anything to deserve it, but it was brought about by Satan. Not sure if that helps our question, but it does answer some things. What about, does sickness ever come from God? Well, we know that it does. The famous story in Exodus chapter 9, 8 through 9. This is about, the Egyptians and being, how the Egyptians left slavery from Egypt. Exodus 9:8. Yahweh said to Moses and to Aaron, take handfuls of ashes of the furnace and let Moses sprinkle it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become small dust over all the land of Egypt, and shall be boils and blisters, breaking out on man and on animal, throughout all the land of Egypt. And down in 15 to 16. For now I would have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this cause I have made you stand, to show you my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. So God did this, and we know this. We know this story. I'm not sure why some people seem to talk like God never brings upon calamity. You know, one of the past episodes, we did this to a king. He directly brought this disease of his bowels. It was just horrible. But he blatantly refused to follow God. In the New Testament, it does this. In John chapter 9, verses 1 through 3, it says this. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, This man didn't sin, nor did his parents, but that the works of God might be revealed in him. So he was blind, apparently, so Jesus could heal him. Seems unfair. Why did he have to go through this? But he was healed. And I know, like when I think of Johnny Erickson, she was, paralyzed. I'm not sure if it was from God's hand or whatever, but didn't she deserve healing? She really believed. And she talks about it in some of her messages and writings. God doesn't heal everybody. Well, another reason this might happen is divine judgment, And this is the story I alluded to before, from 2 Chronicles 21, 14 through 19. Behold, Yahweh will strike your people with a great plague, including your children, your wives, and all your possessions, and you will have great sickness with the disease of your bowels, until your bowels fall out by reason of the sickness day by day. Yahweh stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and of the Arabians, who are beside the Ethiopians. And they came up against Judah, broke into it, and carried away all the possessions that were found in the king's house, including his sons and his wives, so that there was no son left to him except Jehoaz, the youngest of his sons. After all this, Yahweh struck him in his bowels with an incurable disease. In process of time, at the end of 2 years, his bowels fell out by reason of his sickness, and he died of severe diseases. His people made no burning for him, like the burning of his father. So here we have two things. This is divine judgment. It clearly says that, Yahweh struck him in his bowels. So this directly came from God. And why did this happen? To show divine judgment. Well, I was listening to some other different kinds of messages, and one came from Charles Stanley. And what he says is that one of the reasons these things happen to us is we find out who we are. Very interesting take. How do we respond when we're confined or sick, especially if we're active? I know Johnny Erickson talked a lot about that. She was active. She loved horseback riding and sports and swimming and things. For her to be stuck in a wheelchair is one of the worst things you could do to her. It was just horrible. So how do we react? Well, in 2 Corinthians 12:7, it says this, 7 through 9. By reason of the exceeding greatness of the revelation, that I should not be exalted excessively, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan, to torment me, that I should not be exalted excessively. Concerning this thing, I begged the Lord 3 times, that it might depart from me. He said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather glory in my weakness, that the power of Christ may rest on me. So, this has a lot going on. It says it was a messenger of Satan to torment me. So part of this came from Satan. He begged God to take it away, but he needed to not be exalted excessively. He needed to learn about God's grace being sufficient. So this is why this was given. We need to learn a lesson. I've heard of some people who were so busy, they didn't have time for anything. Their family, for God, for worship, for anything. And so something would happen. They go through a sickness or an accident, and that forces you to stay in bed and slow down. So it finds out who we are, but also where we are, So what is God trying to do? Is he trying to make us better or bitter? How do we react? Do we become better or bitter? Interesting. Well, so some of the things that we have pain, especially, and sometimes sickness, is to alert us to danger. We bite into something and it causes us to be sick. It's part of the fallen world, sure, but, it alerts us to that. Don't eat this berry. It's dangerous. Or if you touch something hot, it hurts your hand. And yeah, you may get a burnt hand, but, it alerts us to danger. Well, another one I hadn't even thought of, can't remember where I got this idea, but is, taking the Lord's cup in an unworthy manner, the Lord's Supper. I never even thought about this. 1 Corinthians 11:27-31. Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks the Lord's cup in a way unworthy of the Lord will be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy way eats and drinks judgment to himself, if he doesn't discern the Lord's body. For this cause, many among you are weak and sickly, and not a few asleep. For if we discerned ourselves, we wouldn't be judged. I never even thought about this one. For this cause, many among you are weak and sickly. So maybe you're sick because you don't take seriously the Lord's death, burial, and resurrection. You come to the Lord's cup, which is much more serious than I ever thought it was. For if we discerned ourselves, we wouldn't be judged. So again, this falls under God's judgment too. You're being judged by taking the cup, in an unworthy manner. So these aren't so simple. Like, it's not just one. A lot of these are a combination of things. So, when some bad thing happens to us, we get sick or hurt or break a leg or something, the immediate reaction is, God is terrible. What a jerk. He hates me. He has all this power to stop. Why doesn't he? So we have to almost go through this checklist and see, well, did I get sick just because the state of creation? This is a broken world. So just the way things are, just the fact we can get sick shows that, it's broken, Probably in the original creation, we had no chance of getting hurt or sick. So is this just the same boat we're all in? We catch a cold, some of us catch diseases. We hate it. We don't want this. But is this directly caused by God? Well, no, it comes from a fallen world. The second one is something we all seem to not want to do. Is it our fault? Is it natural consequences? If I touch fire, I'm going to get burned. It's a natural consequence. If I don't take care of my body, I might get sick from that. So we kind of peel back things and said, oh, that's horrible. That child caught cancer. Oh, God is horrible. But you think, well, no, wait a minute here. That came from something in the water. Some big corporation put something bad in the water. And so we have to stop and say, well, it's not my fault, but it is someone's fault. Is it just a natural consequence? The third one is, does it come from Satan? Satan tests us and tries to get us to deny God. And, he does torment people. What I've heard, though, is Satan can't torment you if you're following God, unless God directly allows it. So he can't do anything that God doesn't allow. Well, then we have to ask, well, is this coming directly from God? One passage said God, he disciplines those he loves. So he may send some bad situation, just to discipline us. Are we doing what's right? Are we growing up in the Lord correctly? The man was born blind just so Jesus could heal him. So is this coming from God? And sometimes they're blessings in disguise. Yeah, I went through this sickness. It caused me to be in bed for a month. But wow, during this time in bed, I slowed down. I had time to read and reflect. And I watched some videos about God. Maybe even watch this video, And so something good came out of this, Sometimes we're not going to see it. Year after year after year. It's just this horrible thing we have to go through, Like I have some chronic pain issues. They just don't go away, So, especially like in my knees. I have chronic pain in my knees. And so you want to blame God. You want to get upset. You want to yell and scream. But it's what I have to deal with, So does this come directly from God? Is he doing this? Also connected with that, it may come from God, but it's divine judgment. When I'm standing there with my fist raised to the sky, cursing God, absolutely refusing to follow him, sometimes he acts, So sometimes it is divine judgment. I think I talked about that story of, the prophet, and the group of young kids came out and said, go up, Baldy, go up, Baldy. And they were, this is Elisha. And God sent 3 bears to go and maul 42 of them. So what a horrible God is. But no, this was divine judgment. You don't attack my prophet. You don't belittle my prophet, because then you're belittling God. And finally, number 6 is we find out who we are. How do we, we find out who we are. Like, lost my train of thought, sorry. How do we respond when these bad things happen? Because our normal response is to get upset and angry, but is that the right response? Paul said somewhere that these light and momentary afflictions are nothing compared to the glorious future we're going to have. I can't remember where this passage is. He's going through a lot, but, we're going to get to be in heaven forever. So who are we when we go through them? If we don't have God and we go through this, it's 1,000 times worse, Our lives are really difficult and we don't have God. And finally, it alerts us to danger. We have pain. If we touch something and it burns us, we will get hurt. So most of the time, we're not going to understand what is God trying to do. But the question is, does this make us better or bitter? So we have to go through that process. Makes us better or bitter? Not saying I have all the answers, because there's some terrible things people have to go through. Some things I know personally, and some people just have bad personalities, or they're prone to violence. they're prone to depression. Um, you know, they're they're don't have enough testosterone, so they're kind of struggling with their gender identity. Things like that. My heart goes out to them. I don't know what to say or what to do. But one thing I've noticed is that we all seem to have one or two or three things we have to deal with. Every single one of us. So it makes me wonder if God put those in directly. So let's keep learning. Let's keep trying to. Oh, we forgot one too. I forgot about one. Taking the Lord's cup in an unworthy manner. I never realized how serious this was. I just never realized it. So if you do this in an unworthy manner, and I think for each one of us, we know what that means. We're just drinking wine and having a snack. Are we really feeling God's death, burial, and resurrection? For if we discerned ourselves, we wouldn't be judged. So go through that little checklist. It's very important. Maybe I'll put this checklist in the comments. And I hope we keep learning together. But remember, it isn't all just God's terrible. There's other things happening too. So let's keep learning together.